My name is Tracy Metz. I'm the host of the live talk show Stadsleven, City Life, about life in cities in general and Amsterdam in particular. Over half the world's population lives in cities now, so urban issues are urgent and relevant for all of us. On the website of Stadsleven, www.stadslevenamsterdam.nl, we have a series of video interviews with urban thinkers, including Richard Sennett, Yevgeny Morozov, and Enrique Peñalosa, the former mayor of Bogota in Colombia. Today I'm speaking with Saskia Sassen, sociologist and economist, about her new book called Expulsion, about how the global inequality is increasing at the same time as the amount of global cash is increasing. Money seems to be in no shortage at all, that hangs like a soap bubble around our societies, and where investment is taking off like there's no tomorrow. One of the things you mentioned in Amsterdam, which I thought was really interesting, was the tremendous jump in foreign investment in Amsterdam, in offices and housing. You could also say that's a sign of a city's success.
Part of the issue is that the city had an urban land, because we're to some extent speaking about urban land. And the question is, how do you buy urban land? Well, you buy it via properties, right? So they're buying properties. Who knows what is next? You see, they may be buying the properties to tear them down, although I hope in the case of the 12 or 13 beautiful buildings that were bought in central Amsterdam by a Chinese investor, that they will not tear them down. But we see in New York, they'll buy, they tear down, and then they set up a very high tower. So it's clearly true that cities have become desirable. Everybody wants to buy into them, etc., etc. The issue is partly what you mentioned. There is an excess of cash. We're not just talking financial value as measured by derivatives, a very ambiguous, No, we're talking cash, money, actual money. There has been such an effective extraction of money from citizens and from governments by a highly intermediated and hence pretty difficult to track economic logic that for shorthand we call neoliberalism, but neoliberalism doesn't begin to capture the complexity, effectiveness, and sophistication of this economic circuit. That in fact now they have too much money at the top, and they are losing consumption capacity, buying capacity, etc., in the vast sectors of prosperous working classes and prosperous middle classes. So some economic sectors are beginning to feel the pinch. I think the high-level finance can still manage fine. What is next in terms of this urban property buying is a good question. And we may want to pursue that, at some point here.
I spoke to someone at the city of Amsterdam about your worry that the influx of foreign capital into the city was a negative thing. And he said, well, there are also positive consequences, because you see that foreign investors are willing to, say, if they're buying big blocks of social housing, they're willing to buy in places that for the Dutch are a bad neighborhood. He said foreign investors have much less cliche ideas of good and bad neighborhoods than we do here locally. So he said in a way they're much freer and have a different set of criteria for their investments. And maybe that's not a bad thing after all.
Well, I hope he's right. The evidence suggests that, yes, foreign investors and national investors, really, I think what is important here is that it's corporate buying of urban properties. Whether it's foreign or national, I in my opinion, not everybody agrees, is secondary. So here is the issue. A big foreign company, it happens to be a foreign company, it could be a national, has just bought a huge piece of land in Brooklyn called Atlantic Yards. This is in New York, not in Manhattan. Atlantic Yards is huge space, one of the biggest unbuilt or semi-built spaces of New York City. Right now it has poor artists, little manufacturing shops, poor housing, but it's vibrant. People love going there. It's real, it's urban. Now, the investor has spent a vast amount of money to buy this huge property. Everything that is on there now goes. And it's going to be replaced with 14 huge but beautiful luxury towers for apartments. You get the picture. Now, number one, a plain urbanist, an urban planner would say, great, more people, more density, because before it was everything very low rise, more density, etc. It upgrades the neighborhood, because that is a pretty run. It used to be an old manufacturing and sort of transport space. 14 towers, so many new consumers. Yes, of course that is true. But at the same time, I would argue that this mode of occupying urban space de-urbanizes the city. We love cities because there are all these mixes and this little bit of town, it's an adventure. Those 14 beautiful, perfect towers, one thing that they will not be is an adventure. And in that sense, it sort of de-urbanizes. Now, that is sort of just the practical side, of the city. There is also a social question that hangs in there. And who benefits from these acquisitions? It's not clear. And again, whether they are national or foreign, I think is secondary. They're corporate. That's the point. Ultimately, even a national corporation might be owned by who knows what mix of international capitalists. And the final point, which to me is the most important one, is that, and this is my particular definition of the city, not everybody would agree with this, but I think of a city, if I try to understand what is a city without falling into the notion, well, a city is a city, densely built up, whatever. I'd say the city is a place which, when you really try to get down to the bottom of it, is a place where those without power, historically, have been able to make a history, make a culture, make a kind of sub-economy. And that has added to the cosmopolitanism of cities, to all these diversities, and what is happening right now, these types of acquisitions, no matter that they add density, and one would say, oh, density is urban, well, I'm not so sure, right? And they are problematic. If a city becomes more like a corporate office park, a fully controlled space, if the tissue of a real urban tissue has a lot of little streets, little square, little poor government office that is, however, an anchor for a lot of the residents, because that's my government office, a little this, a little that, something is lost. And we wind up with something that is more like an office park, only with a lot of apartments for residences. We will lose something. Finally, my big question is, why are they so keen now on buying what is ultimately a complex situation, which is buying urban land? That is not an easy thing. My project is called Who Owns the City? Which I think is a good question to ask. It's not clear at all. Who owns the city? And in principle, streets and parks are public spaces. If you replace a whole set of blocks with a mega project, who gives those corporations the right, or the local government the right, to accept that they eliminate all that public space? Who benefits? Is there a reason? There are too many tricky questions in this kind of buying. I do think also on the positive end that even if they transform many of our cities into corporate parks mostly, that the push towards having genuine urban space is not going to die. So we'll find out other ways of expanding, like Atlantic Yards was a way of expanding the city when so much of Manhattan was getting, so the artists went there. But, these are all big ifs.
Thank you so much, Saskia Sassen, for this eloquent expose based on your new book, Expulsion, Uitstoting in the Dutch translation.
It's always a great pleasure, Tracy. It's wonderful to talk with you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Saskia. Bye-bye.